Welcome, citizens of the globe, to the Frontend Heroes podcast, where we discuss all things villainous and heroic about the front end of software development. My name is Evan Payne. I'm a senior front-end developer at Actimo, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Scott Francis, a senior front-end engineer at Porsche. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, Evan. Really good. Honestly, today, I had a great week last week. Went over to Germany to the Porsche factory and the Porsche museum, and they got us to drive some cars. I drove in a Taycan, which was insanely fast, full electric car, insanely fast. I felt like I was on a roller coaster or something. It was incredible. You'd never believe that it was like an electric car. I'm not strictly a car guy, but I'm definitely a Porsche guy. Definitely.
That's good. Yeah, but you wouldn't want to be like working for Apple and be like, oh, but I really, I got to use that Android phone.
No. It was an amazing week and great thing to do. But today is a red letter day. After 2 months, the kids have gone back to school. Yeah. I finally we can begin the healing.
Exactly. Yeah, you can have dates with your significant other again. Yeah, absolutely. From my side, we've been away all summer, and we're finally back home. And it's been so nice to be able to actually go down and walk in the forest or go to the sea where we were in the city before. And yeah, it's nice to be back. Cool.
For sure.
Now, listeners, I want to front load something here. We've done this before, we'll do it again. And it's to ask you, please, dear listeners, give us some feedback on the show. Leave a comment or a rating where you listen to us, or drop us a message on Twitter. We're at Heroes Frontend. We just really want to know, do you like the format? What else you might be interested in hearing us to discuss? Other guests you might want us to have on. So thank you for that. You are the best listeners a podcast could ever hope for. Today's episode is sponsored by Netcentric, an award-winning Adobe Global Alliance partner and consultancy, headquartered in Switzerland with offices all over Europe as well as in Pune, India. They're currently hiring for a number of roles, so if you're looking and you're interested in being in a consultancy, check them out. They are awesome. We are, as ever, so glad to have their support with this show. Now, with all that out of the way, today we have a guest. His Twitter bio, at the very least, says that he is a professional gate opener. He's managing DevRel at Auth0, an instructor at Egghead, and author of the Developer Microskills newsletter. So, Sam Julien, can you introduce yourself and let us know a bit about how you got into the tech scene to begin with?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So currently what I'm doing is I am the interim head of developer marketing at Auth0 right now. We had some changes when my boss left for a startup, and so I've been stepping up to take over some of that stuff. And I've been at Auth0 for about 3 years, actually just recently crossed 3 years. And before that, I was a full stack developer at a nonprofit in Portland, doing C# on the back end and then Angular on the front end. I was responsible for a big migration from AngularJS to Angular, which is kind of how I got started in the developer relations and technical content area. I built a huge course on migrating from AngularJS to Angular and released that in 2018, and that kind of sparked a lot of changes in my career. And so yeah, I'm a self-taught developer. I didn't go to a boot camp, don't have a degree in computer science, but I had a number of friends kind of help me learn modern JavaScript around 2013, 2014. Got my first job as a junior developer for a financial company. And yeah, that's the very basic nutshell of it. Developer relations is a thing I'm very passionate about. I wrote a book just about a year ago called Getting Started in Developer Relations. That's all about, how to get started in developer relations. Yeah, that's a pretty good nutshell.
Okay. Yeah, and for those of you that are paying close attention, you'll remember that Sam was nominated as True Hero back at the beginning of this season by Chris Sev. And yeah, he was adamant in saying how glad he was to have you in the community and how supportive you are. And we immediately went and followed. I've been keeping up to date with your newsletters. It's really good stuff. And I like the approach you take as well in them of not taking being comfortable in front of audiences for granted. That's something that you assume that all DevRel people or all kind of visible front enders in the community are like extroverts, and that's not always the case. It sometimes is a skill to come across that way, even. Yeah.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. For me, I'm definitely an introvert, and I've had to practice a lot of those things, a lot of speaking and things like that. I had a couple of earlier life experiences that helped prepare me for that. I was a musician and all throughout school, and so I did a lot of musical performance, which really helped get me acclimated to being on a stage. And then um, when I was broke 20 something, I was uh, in financial sales, and it was a commission job, and I had to learn how to basically cold approach people and talk to strangers and that kind of thing. And it was extremely difficult and very intimidating, but I had no choice. That was the only way I could pay my rent. And so I quickly had to go through trial by fire to learn those skills. Um, and so those like networking and speaking skills, they don't come naturally, I'd say, for most people. I think you have to learn them or be taught them by somebody else. And so that's kind of what I try to do in the newsletter, is just rather than have these big sweeping statements or kind of hand wavy things, I try to really drill down into I call them micro skills of every little thing, like very, very tiny decisions and skills that you can practice to add up to accumulate into success.
Okay, so was this the bit by bit approach? What the thing that you used when you were doing the cold sales? Because, or did you like? It seems to me like it would be the kind of environment where you would have to go like all in to get places with that. Like, did you discover when you were doing that that actually this isn't the approach for you? You need to like think about things a little more and break them down into like so you can see how you could do those better.
In the moment, being in my early 20s and not knowing what I was doing, and I was just going to sales training and things like that. I don't think I had the wherewithal to like put any of that together. But what has been happening is, since I've been teaching DevRel to people, I've kind of looked back and thought, okay, what are the things that actually helped me learn and grow over the last several years, over the last like decade maybe, and realizing that it wasn't like that those kind of eureka moments, or like the big times where you have some big revelation, they don't happen all at once. They usually are because of a series of small things that have added up. And what really helps me are just like little practical things, like like how to approach a group of people, or how to how to gracefully exit a conversation, or that kind of, like, those little tiny skills, like these just little skills that you can learn. Those are the things that you know made me feel like I was getting traction on things, and I would start to see results in that kind of thing. And so that's the way I try to teach those skills in turn.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, like honestly, there's the skill that I'm yet to acquire is to remember people's names. Like immediately in conversation. I mean, I've tried like using their name straight away, and then 5 minutes later it's gone. I mean, like it helps a little bit, but like that is definitely a skill that I'm yet to acquire. But I think that breaking things down. I mean, I guess this is something that you could take into any of us could take into coding. Really, is like it is a skill. Like, something at the beginning can look so daunting. Like the end product of anything can look so daunting, and like we see that breaking it down into sections and then into components and like bits of the component, like is the best way for us to do it as developers. So yeah, for sure, it's going to be a skill that's going to help like in other forms, in other walks of life.
Yeah, yeah. On the remembering names thing, what I used to do when I was in finance was I would go if I was at a networking event, I would talk to people for maybe like 20 minutes at a time, like 4 or 5 conversations. And then I would immediately go off and write down the name of who I talked to and where they worked. And that seemed to work the best.
Yeah.
I could really not remember it for more than 10 or 15 minutes, and then it was gone forever.
Yeah, I do a similar thing at work. I have a Notion board of like basically it's like all people at my company and like just little things about them that might help me to remember
Yeah.
like the names and who they are and background and things like that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this may be this may be a good segue, and it may not be. The episode title this time around is "The Incredibles," and as usual with these, it's maybe a bit of a stretch. But if you've seen the film, one of the themes is about sort of learning to embrace and to grow upon the powers you have within you already. And I kind of feel like this idea of microskills is this way of bringing challenges into people's minds so that they can try them out beforehand. It's this idea of like the kid, you're fast, but have you been in a position where you can run on water? Because you can do that. You're that fast, right? They all, throughout the course of the film, sort of find when you're put to the like crucial like moment of having to save your family or whatever it might be, you can do pretty wild things. You can do things you never understood. And developers, as Scott, you were saying, like we do that a lot where we're just like, well, what if I have no choice other than to try and make this thing work? Can I figure out how to do that? Can I do that? Yeah. And it's the same thing in personal relations. You're suddenly at a conference giving a keynote, how'd that happen? But you can probably pull it off or you wouldn't have gotten into that position to begin with, exposing yourself to this. So a lot of stretching the metaphor, but I think the idea is you are enabling people to become superheroes through this kind of work, and I think it's really awesome.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think it's not as big of a stretch as I think you might be thinking, because the one thing that I've really found is, and I say this I have this article called "The Painfully Shy Developer's Guide to Networking for a Better Job," and one of the things I say in there is that social skills are sort of like learning a new programming language, and what I find is that people um, underestimate their capacity to learn and change in an area they're not very comfortable, familiar with. So a lot of developers, they get really intimidated by thinking about like giving a talk or having to meet people or um, any number of those kinds of things. And what they don't often realize is like they already possess the skill to learn those things because they've already had to learn a complex subject in programming. And maybe it's not even related to stuff they've done for their job. Maybe it's just some life experience they've had where they've had to learn and adapt and practice something, maybe practice a sport or practice an instrument or that kind of thing. But I find that people kind of, when the context is different, they tend to forget that their experience is directly applicable to that new skill they're trying to learn. And so that's one of the focuses I try to have in my newsletter and books and that kind of thing, is like, you're probably better off than you think you are, and you just have to practice this new set of skills. Like it's not about your like value as a person or your like capacity to do something. It's really just like, this is an area that you don't have practice in. And so I try to give people the blueprint of, here are the different skills you can break down to practice in the real world, and you likely already have the capacity to do them. You just need to put in the reps of doing it.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the comparison I was hoping to draw. And I mean, all of the guests we've had on in one way or another have talked about that sort of encountering something that was just hard and then kind of achieving it.
Yeah.
Because honestly, that's kind of what life is. Any capacity, career, family, any of these things, you encounter these things and then you succeed. And even if you fail, we talked another time, even if you fail, you can take away and learn from that, so it can become a success as well. And not to be too afraid of that either.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I fundamentally believe that the way we grow is by taking risks, doing challenging things quickly, getting feedback on them. A big part of that is trying and failing and then taking that feedback and iterating on it. But if you look back on any difficult thing you've accomplished in life, there's usually that formula of like figuring out what the hard work was and doing it anyway, and then taking that experience and learning from it and shaping yourself through interacting with the world. And so I just try to take that framework and cast it into different areas.
It's really good. This is another bridge, but your the other hat. We've been talking about microskills and stuff, and I hope we do come back to it. But the other hat is DevRel specifically for Auth0,
Yeah.
and we also have had other DevRel guests on. And what I like about the trend in that is that these companies that have really proper official developer relations roles, they're solving problems for the community, and they're making it so that the average developer doesn't have to go through a particular hard time and learn through
Right.
their failures and so on. They can just plug it in or just get it done. So, I mean, for authorization and like login and credentials and all that sort of stuff, there's a lot of things, and you guys kind of solve that, right? Um, I don't necessarily want to be too like salesy, but it's a cool product. I guess one thing would be like how have you been drawn to that, and like what are you excited about regards to the problems that it solves?
Yeah, I'm one of those people who can't work for somewhere that I don't agree with, like that I
Sure.
don't believe in, especially with the nature of the type of work that I'm doing. And what's always excited me about Auth0 is that it really is a difficult problem. Like and if you've ever had to build your own login system, it's not easy. There's a lot of, it seems easy on the surface because you think, oh, I just need to throw together some sort of login and password and I'll be fine. And then you start thinking through, like, once that goes beyond just a basic hobby application, you actually have real users in production and all of that. You start realizing, oh, there's a lot of complicated stuff around data privacy and passwords and multi-factor authentication and all of those things where it adds up really quickly and can get really overwhelming. And so I've always really liked Auth0 because it's targeted at developers. It's, that's our bread and butter, is just helping developers build things. That's really the core of it. And so for me, it makes it easy to do developer relations because it's just like, hey, you want to build this cool thing and you have this problem of needing user management, and we have a thing for you that can do that. And I don't, so I don't have to be very aggressive or salesy because it's just sort of like, it's either going to work for you or it's not. And if it's not, like, let's figure out why it's not working for you and figure out whether that's something on our end or we're not the right answer or something. um but yeah, it's a cool place to work. And it's at this point it's kind of funny because Auth0 is, I guess we're coming up on 7 years old, somewhere in there. And but at this point we're sort of some of the I would say we're sort of in a long tier of developer relations programs, where we're becoming quite established as a developer relations program. And especially through like the ambassadors program and things like that. And so we're in this interesting state where we're starting to evolve and grow and scale beyond kind of the scrappy startup DevRel and into like I mean, the problem that I'm sort of obsessed with these days is like, how do we scale developer relations in a way that remains authentic and helpful to the community and isn't just sort of, um, marketing speak or something.
So how how do you do that?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think a lot of it, I mean, a lot of this is sort of what I'm working through, but a lot of it I think is um, continuing to just scale presence in local communities, hiring people in different regions and having ambassadors in different regions and countries to be involved with meetups and conferences and write really good content and uh, be involved in forums and again, the goal just being help developers build cool things, help them get their job done and um, enable, give them ideas on how your user management can actually take your application to the next level. You can do some cooler things around passwordless or uh, biometrics or something like that to take things to the next level. We just sponsored a hackathon for Hashnode, and we had quite a number of really, really cool projects for that, and that made me really happy. Maybe there's a way we can. I don't know if that stuff's public yet, but if so, it'd be cool to link to some of that. But that's kind of a prime example of what we want to do, is just give people the tools they need to build whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah, and
The
to that,
question.
sorry,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say to that end, I think that chimes with what you said before about yourself, about being somebody who really needs to believe in like the thing that they're doing, like to have that really resonate with people in the community, like wherever you are, and if you're doing this at scale, particularly, the challenge would be to find other people who have the same mindset. I think it seems to me like you would not be able to pull that off without finding people who were really embedded, really involved in, and really believed in like the things that you were actually putting out there. Without that, I just don't think that would work. The authenticity is key there, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen a lot around the web recently, and it's a side effect of being on Twitter for sure. But that there are all these communities that spin up, and they're not always based on a DevRel team or person or anything like that. But usually, after a while, someone will come into the forefront. Like, so there's an Angular community, or maybe there's like two or three actually, and there's the NGRX specifically community within that, and Discord groups and chats and stuff. And you see a lot of the same faces just pop up, and like I said, they're almost more ambassadors for that particular technology than anything else. But you solve the same issues over and over. You've seen similar things pop up, and you have some time to help. That's a cool little community to be part of. My question always comes. There's two parts to this. One is, how do you find a balance when you're acting as a sort of like shepherd for new joiners? How do you stop from being annoyed at the same questions being asked in the tiny slight variations over and over again? Because that can be tedious, I'll put it that way, to answer the same question over and over again. And then also, how do you keep up to date if that's like the biggest part of your job, is doing this outreach and just sort of talking and a little show and tell, but not hitting those sort of, I've got uh, 10,000 users on this project, and we want to switch over to passwordless, not having that as your main task for the month. So
Yeah.
that's two things at once. But
Yeah. So on the first part with the answering the same questions over and over again, one of the best things you can do as a developer advocate is to build yourself a text automation library, or a library of links and common questions and
nice.
chunks of text. So I use an app called Text Expander, that is basically lets me create snippets of text or snippets with links. So I can just type in a couple of letters, and it expands out, into, like, I get asked all the time, how do I apply to the ambassadors program? So I just have a link, or I can type a couple keys, and it expands out into my ambassadors program spiel and link and all of that stuff. Which also is a great thing to do for applying to conferences, by the way. I have like my bio as a snippet and all of my links as snippets and that kind of thing. So that can really, really help, because as you do developer advocacy, you start to see trends in the common questions, and there's definitely a skill to identifying those and having answers ready for them. And of course, if you start to see anything come up more than a couple of times, you should definitely create a piece of content around it as well. That's a very good signal that I would definitely say, at least if you see it 3 times, absolutely make a piece of content about it. Even once or twice, though, I find on the second time that there's a really good chance it's going to come up again. So that I do that myself when somebody writes in. I almost always write an article or a newsletter about it if it seems like a good question, because it comes up, and it almost does. So that's a really good way you can help yourself with that. And that also, by removing that friction, that'll also, you have nothing to be annoyed about anymore. If somebody asks you the same question, it's just a matter of, oh yeah, let me go find that thing that I already made about this, and then you can just answer them. And you always have to remember, as a dev advocate, or whether you're doing like community manager or whatever else, like, you have to put yourself in that person's shoes. Usually people are firing off these forum posts or questions, like they're frustrated, they're in the middle of something, they're trying to get it done, and you can't let that affect how you respond. Because 9 times out of 10, like, if somebody writes you a snarky thing and you just write back with like, hey, like, sorry you're having a hard time, here's a resource to help you, like, most of the time they will respond and be like, sorry I was a jerk, I was just like really frustrated. Like, I mean, like, most of the time people are not, so I just sort of let that stuff roll off me, and I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Let's
And
see. So
before
yeah.
we go into part two, I will also say, from a senior to junior perspective as well, I think a lot of times it can come across as junior is hesitant to ask a question because they're worried they're going to annoy the senior, and it can come across that way because they sometimes the seniors get asked the same question, but it is more. The frustration is not with having to repeat themselves. It can oftentimes just be in having to think about how to phrase it. So you're absolutely right that having something that I can copy and paste to at least give the immediate response, and then the follow-up, that's easy. That's conversation. But the let me solve your problem in a single response kind of impulse is not always the easiest. And yeah, so
Yeah, I think it's the recreating the work that gets
yeah,
frustrating. And so if you can save yourself that step and already have a group of links or a pre-canned response that you can just tweak, then that'll take the edge off of that dramatically.
it's great.
Um, so then the second part you asked was about like how you stay up to date.
Yeah.
And so that, some of that's going to depend on the company, that, where DevRel sits in the organization and what the thing is. But one of the best things you can do, I mean, most of what people talk about with DevRel is all of the external facing stuff, getting involved with the community and doing talks and making content and all of that. But one of the best things you can do for your career, from a DevRel standpoint, is building internal relationships with your product teams and your docs teams and your architects and all of that, and being tuned into the product roadmap, and just knowing, having your finger on the pulse of
Mm.
what's going on. So one of the biggest values that DevRel brings to a company is all of the developer intelligence. Dev advocates have a chance to be in these sort of behind the scenes conversations in Discord and Slack and forums and that kind of thing. And so you want to build that two-way bridge between all the other teams in the company. There's a lot of teams at a software company that are like, if only I could just ask a developer what they think about this, but they just don't have, they're in product marketing, or they're in, um, you know, customer service or something, and they're not the developers themselves, and they don't know how to speak that language. And if they just barge into a developer community and be like, hey, I'm a product marketer, like, tell me how you feel, like, nobody's going to listen to them. So as a dev advocate, you have a big chance to grow your career by being that bridge between the two, and helping out the rest of your company, and um, being the champion for developers to the rest of the company, but then also taking back what kind of what's coming up with the product, and what's on the horizon, and then sharing that out to the community.
Yeah, I think it's a very good place to be, and enough so that, like, in the past, um, a few of us, even though we were working at this consultancy, we felt like we were doing dev advocate work in the sense that we were advocating for the developers within the consultancy, if that makes sense. And it wasn't like for a product, and it wasn't for the clients that we were serving. It was more just, you guys have such potential. Let's work on our internal documentation within this company so that we're not repeating ourselves, and so on and so forth. It was a weird concept because there was no product, right? There was no, like, it was just, we were all working for the same overarching company. but it ended up feeling the same way. And one of those that was in that community, Natalia Vendito, went on. She's been on the podcast before. She's now working for MongoDB. But it was that same drive to be like, hey, come on, like we can make something really good here, regardless of where you are. So it's interesting that it's not just a product specific impulse either.
No,
Yeah.
I think it's cool, like to use it in the way that you just said, Evan. Like that, you would really raise the profile up and make people see that they could do like a bit more than they thought they could. And I think that probably ties in with the micro skills as well that we talked about earlier. I mean, just like bit by bit, helping people to see that they could really that they could really get something else. They could be beyond what they thought they were capable of. But I have one, like maybe this is a little curveball, or maybe this is like super specific. But in terms of like getting into conferences and actually like pitching to conferences and getting accepted as a speaker, do you have any like specific guidance on that? I know that you do that yourself, and I think that I've been speaking with developers just recently, and they're really keen to get into this, but find that they're being rejected.
I
Or
would say I think he's going to his text expander now.
yeah, like maybe he is, maybe he is.
I actually was going to my blog to paste in
Okay, good.
an article that I wrote called "Speaker Stuff No One Tells You About Applying to Conferences."
Cool. Okay.
That yeah, there to just sort of boil it down, though, that there's kind of a couple different things to think about there. One is, and I say this in the article, applying to conferences is a skill you can learn. So it's just another, you just have to think of conferences, like applying to conferences. It's just another game that you have to learn the rules to, basically. there's, and I learned this through applying to conferences and getting feedback from organizers and that kind of thing. You have to kind of put yourself in the organizer's shoes. They're trying to find a balance between known quantities of speakers, so that they can sell tickets and have a solid lineup. So they can't take they've got to take calculated risks, so you have to do things to assuage those risks. You have to um, have some, especially if you're a first time speaker, having some kind of online presence to show, kind of who you are and what you're doing. And um, if you can do anything to like speak at a local meetup and record yourself or something like that, um, the conference organizers have to try to find the balance of encouraging first time speakers, but also still having a good solid lineup that they know is going to go well, and that nobody's going to do something horrible on stage or throw something off. Or so you want to kind of assuage that concern for them. And then at the same time, when you're writing your CFP, try to think about it from the organizer's perspective. A lot of people, what they do when they write CFPs for the first time, sorry, I didn't say CFP means call for papers or call for proposals. It's basically the form you submit with your title and a description of your talk and a couple of other questions, that kind of things. But a lot of people, when they write these summaries of talks, they use I a lot. They'll say like, in this talk, I'm going to go through the 5 reasons that you should use NGRX in your project, and I'm going to do this and that. And what a better approach would be, thinking about it from the audience's perspective and using you a lot, saying that like, you're going to learn this, or the audience is going to go through this. They're going to feel a lot better by the end because they're going to understand this concept better. Or you always want to think about it in terms of like what value you're going to bring to the conference and to the audience and to the organizers, and put your change your language in your proposal to that. And then beyond that, it's just a numbers game. You're just, once you craft a few good talk descriptions and you just blast it out to as many places as you can, and you get to know, try to get to know the organizers. A lot of, I mean, this is one of the things, and we're in sort of a weird time because of all the virtual events, but with the in-person conferences, a lot of conferences happen, or a lot of conference speakers get invited by being at another conference and meeting an organizer, and the organizer sees their talk, and then they come up to them afterwards and they ask them, like I've gotten asked to speak at conferences while I'm at after parties for other conferences, and that's the kind of thing where really it's like you just got to kind of get your foot in the door, and then you can kind of ride that wave and keep going with it.
Yeah. So I guess the
So hopefully that
first,
article
yeah.
will have some of that info in there to get people started with that stuff.
No,
Yeah.
super interesting. Thanks very much. I mean, like it makes a lot of sense. It's not something that I've like tried to do. It's not something. Um, like I've never really given that much thought, but I know that it's a source of frustration to people. So I think that's like super helpful that you can talk and just give some tips like that. I mean, like,
Yeah.
and they all make perfect sense. Like it's when you think about it now, yeah, it
Yeah,
really
totally.
makes
One thing
sense.
I always say to people too is like, and I say this in the article as well, but like think about whether it's something you actually want to do or if you just feel like you should be doing it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think people get to a stage where they're like, oh well, I guess I have to go give conference talks in order to advance my career, and I guess that's a thing that I need to do. And so I don't think, I mean, there's plenty of uh, a lot of the best speakers I know are not the best engineers that I know. It's a skill set, and if you want to get on stage and you want to teach and you want to give talks, like awesome, like more power to you. But I also don't want people to feel like, oh well, in order for me to advance my career, I have to go give these conference talks, and I hate being on stage and I don't ever want to be around people, but I have to do it anyway. Like they're sort of
Mm-hmm.
setting yourself up to fail, if you're trying to do it out of obligation.
Yeah, I think it really does come down to find what works for you and try it. Like I gave a couple of conference talks, and they were good, but it felt so ephemeral, if that makes sense, meaning short lived. And I know it benefited to a degree, and it helped people think through some things when I was sharing it in the moment. I had talked about NativeScript. I had talked about just doing interesting things inside Jira, even though you couldn't, and so on. And that was good. But it was the recording that I did of one of my meetup talks that really actually connected with people, because I put it up on YouTube afterwards. And now that's like the long tail video that I've had just constantly getting views, which is wild. And honestly, I would rather just do more YouTube videos like that. I don't have a tone, I don't have like the piece for it, but that makes a lot more sense. I can talk. I'm good at that. I can, edit as well. So maybe that's where I should spend my time rather than going to these conferences. And I think that's okay. You should experiment. You should try it. If you're more comfortable writing, we've had I've had talks with this one guy, and he's not that good of a speaker, but his writing is excellent. And well, go with that, especially if you enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's something to be said for finding what medium you enjoy the most and just running with it.
Mm. And I think so. We've talked around it a bit, but what I'm seeing here is that, again, coming back to this idea of helping other people find their superpowers, and if you're being a responsible part of this community, you should do that. The people that we see around that are visibly successful are usually the ones that have that impulse to be like, hey, I see you struggling there, what can I do to give you a leg up, or they see something going on, they say, oh, okay, let me just let me just step into this conversation and sort of steer it over in a certain direction, just to get everyone back on the right track. That impulse comes from a place of wanting to grow the community and help people up, not just get yourself ahead. And the byproduct is you do get yourself ahead too. It's a really interesting thing. It comes in so many different forms, but I love our career for that there seem to be so many of these people around, because it works. Helping other people, it works. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It definitely does. I think that that's one of the. I think that it also you can't be without authenticity. I think we've spoken. We certainly
Yeah.
spoke about this like 10 minutes ago. But you can't be without the authenticity. If you are doing it for for that reason, then I think it's not really gonna pay off. I also think that people, like, going back to the point where people are really like chasing being on a conference stage to further their career. Like, I also wonder, like, how people are really like measuring their success like in the day to day, because like it could be like without doing anything, without having a Twitter presence, without having like a really successful YouTube video, without doing conference talks, there'll be developers out there who are super successful at what they do, like super
Yeah.
successful, like, and they will nearly always, if they're working with other people, they will nearly always be passing that on as well, because they will be fairly senior, if not very senior, and they will be passing their knowledge on. I think that like people shouldn't lose track of that basically, and get like really caught up in like what success actually is, because it's very likely that they were already successful. Um, but
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's many different paths to success. I mean, one of my really good friends is a principal architect at a big financial company, and he's um he's also one of the best teachers I've ever known. He was really influential in my career, and yeah, I think he's given a couple of meetup talks, but he's mostly teaches internally at all the companies he's been at. I've seen him give a couple of meetup talks, but I don't know if he's ever done any conference talks. He hasn't written very many articles in the last few years, but I know from talking to him that internally he's writing huge amounts of documentation, and he's leading mentoring sessions, and he's training all kinds of people and all of that stuff. And he's one of the most talented developers I've ever known, and also one of the most talented teachers I've ever known. But nobody, you're not going to know who he is. Nobody's going to know
Yeah.
who he is, but he's obviously like ridiculously successful if he's a principal architect at a big financial company. So everybody's got their own path that they can forge ahead. And so that's why I always tell people, like, if you're interested in writing or speaking or DevRel or that kind of thing, then yeah, let's do it. Like, let me help you figure out the path to success for you. But you know, you don't have. There's tons of more developers out there are not on Twitter than are on Twitter. So
Yeah, it's good to keep that in mind, because it can definitely feel like you're trying to keep up with. I saw a tweet earlier today that was saying, like, don't compare yourself to people that are 10 years ahead of you. I'm like, that's very true, but I'm comparing myself to someone that's in the same year as me, and I'm like, that yeah, you shouldn't compare yourself to anyone. You should just be yourself, connect with the people around you that you have direct interactions with, and that's going to be the best thing in the long term.
yeah, and comparing yourself to who you were
Yeah,
before as well. I think
that's a good
because
point.
I've struggled with this myself, because I got into development later. I mean, like 28 was when I got my first tech job, and if I had started doing development at 21 fresh out of school, like, I'd probably be in a completely different place right now in my life. But I also was just like some random kid born in Valdosta, Georgia, and didn't go to engineering school, didn't know what a boot camp was, all that kind of stuff. So, like, if I try to compare myself to people who even are at the same level of experience with me, maybe they had different circumstances that were better or worse than me. It doesn't, it has to be relative to who you are,
Yeah,
because obviously I probably had it better than a lot of people in a lot of ways. But I have to think about, where was I 7 years ago? Where was I 4 years ago? Where was I yesterday? And how can I continue to grow and help more people as I continue to grow in my career?
yeah, makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, we're getting towards that point in the show. Um, I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of really heartfelt moments there, and so we won't reiterate any of those. Before we go to the ending bits, we have our segment True Hero. And in this segment, we want to highlight a few true front end heroes that are working across the planet, and to thank them for all that they do. So this time around, Sam, you've nominated one, Anna Sidre. Can you tell us a bit about her and why you thought of her for this?
Sure. Yeah. So Anna is in Spain, not far from you all, and she is probably mostly well known by the Angular community. She organized NG Spain, and she was involved with NG Vikings, a couple of conferences. But Anna joined our team like a year and a half ago at Auth0, and so I've had the pleasure of getting to work with her and then manage her, and she's just um, she's just such a superstar in so many ways. She has the combination of just being like highly empathic while also being just really on top of things. And I don't even think people, if you don't work with her on a day-to-day basis, you probably wouldn't even realize how just how much she's doing. And she's been stepping up to be the interim manager while I've been the interim head of DevMar for the DevRel team, and she's just doing a great job of like working behind the scenes to empower our DevRel team and help them be successful. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give her a shout out because I think that she's doing some really great stuff. And if you're seeing things that you like out of some of the Auth0 DevRel team right now, a lot of it is because of the work that Anna's putting in right now. So, yeah.
Nice. Cool. So, Anna, again, thank you for all that you do. Please keep up the good work. So lastly here, any proper hero is a well-rounded one, and we want to share some simple musical picks. So Scott, what's the favorite thing you've been listening to lately?
Again, nothing new. Like, but like I don't know where I heard it, but in the week I heard "Stand by Me" by Oasis, right? Not the classic, but "Stand by Me" by Oasis, right? And it took me back, and I was like, man, I really love that song. That's amazing. And yesterday I had the kitchen stereo to myself and put the album "Be Here Now" on, like by turned it up. And I remember that I really loved this album in 1997 when it came out. And I remember distinctly that that people at first said this was an amazing album, and then about 6 months later said, this album stinks. Like, this album's terrible, right? And I think I haven't listened to it for like 24 years. And I put it on yesterday. Couple of bad songs on there. But honestly, I loved it. So I'm plugging that this week.
Nice. Cool. Sam, how about you?
So, one thing that it's not out yet, but I've been a really big fan of Radiohead since I was in high school, probably, which at this point is like a embarrassingly long time ago. But they are coming out. They just announced that in November they're going to come out with this like reissue of their albums Kid A and Amnesiac, which came out when I was in high school and are kind of like anthems of my teenage years. But they're doing a re-release of it, and they're combining it with a bunch of unreleased material and a bunch of B-sides and stuff like that. And so that's something that came onto my radar this week, and they also released a single from it. I haven't actually had a chance to listen to it yet, but that's something that I'm very, very excited about.
Nice. I'm also very excited about that. Kid A in particular, and Amnesiac. They were both very personality defining.
Me too, yeah.
Some big experiences around those two albums in my tape player and then in my CD player. So connected to that is my pick slightly, which is to say I got really into the horn and sax arrangements on Amnesiac. And like, spinning plates and all of that. And Colin Stetson, I think, was playing in that group. Maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, he did some cool sax stuff. There's this other sax band that came up on my Spotify recommendations because of that. The band is called Moon Hooch. And I guess if you want an album, there's one called Red Sky, which I like. But they also have this new thing, which is Super Cone Bros. It's weird. I don't know how to describe it. It's weird stuff. It's that very low part of the saxophone, or maybe even like another instrument where it's really guttural and stuff, and these weird arrhythmic sort of things going on. So I've been getting a kick out of that. So worth checking out. And I do want to comment, in case anyone's listening consecutively, last time I picked the Cuphead soundtrack because it was great. But then since then I've played Cuphead, And now I can't listen to the soundtrack without feeling anxious because it's such a hard game. It very much changed the nature of it. Before it was like, oh, this is nice, like 30s music, and now it's like, this is hard.
That's great.
So nature of music. Great. So it looks like that is all the time we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening. As we said earlier, if you enjoyed the show, you should like, heart, or star us in your podcatcher of choice. Reviews and ratings are how the fancy algorithms help people find our content, and the power to help is within you. If you have any questions or topics you want covered in our next episode, send a tweet to us at Heroes Frontend. We'll add it to our list. Until next time, heroes, remember, with great front-end power comes great responsibility. See you next time.